When I told my son I lost my job, he arrived with legal papers. Sign here. It legally separates our finances. When you die broke, your debts stay yours. I won't be dragged down by a loser. Hurt, but calm, I signed everything. He had no idea about the $900 million inheritance I'd just received, or what I was about to do with it. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me take you back to how this all started. 3 days earlier, I'd been stacking returned books at the Millfield Public Library when Mrs. Henderson, the head librarian, called me into her office. At 67, I'd worked there part-time for 8 years, ever since my husband died, and I needed something to fill the empty hours. "Margaret," she said, not meeting my eyes, "budget cuts mean we have to eliminate your position. Today's your last day." Just like that. 8 years of service, gone. They gave me a cardboard box and 15 minutes to pack my desk. I drove home to my small apartment, feeling like the world was crumbling beneath my feet. My Social Security barely covered rent, and that library job paid for groceries and utilities. But that evening, something extraordinary happened. The mail carrier knocked on my door with a certified letter from Switzerland. Inside was a letter from a law firm informing me that my great-aunt Beatrice, a woman I'd met exactly once at a family reunion 30 years ago, had died and left me her entire estate. The number made me sit down hard. $900 million. I read it 3 times. Sure, it was a mistake. But the lawyers were very real, very Swiss, and very serious. Aunt Beatrice had made a fortune in rare art and European real estate. She'd never married, had no children, and apparently remembered the one family member who'd actually talked to her about her paintings that day in 1995. I should have been ecstatic. Instead, I felt oddly calm as I folded the letter and put it in my kitchen drawer. I didn't call anyone. I didn't celebrate. I just made myself tea and sat at my little table, thinking about how my life had just completely changed. The next morning, David called. "Mom, I heard about the library. Look, I know this is hard, but Patricia and I have been talking." Patricia, my daughter-in-law, who treated me like an inconvenient obligation. "We think this might be a blessing in disguise, a chance for you to downsize, simplify your life." What he meant was, move somewhere cheaper so you're not our problem. I told him I was fine, that I'd figure something out. But David has never been one to let things go when he thinks he knows better. That's how I ended up opening my door yesterday afternoon to find my son standing there with a briefcase, looking like he was about to foreclose on my apartment. "We need to talk," he said, pushing past me into my living room. "Patricia's been researching, and there are legal ways to protect families from financial liability." "Smart planning, Mom." He opened his briefcase with the efficiency of a businessman, which he was. David sold insurance and had done well for himself, well enough to live in a house 3 times the size of my apartment, well enough to take vacations to Europe while I clipped coupons. "These documents legally separate our finances," he explained, spreading papers across my coffee table. "It means when you inevitably can't pay your bills, when you need expensive medical care, when you die with debts, none of that becomes our responsibility." I stared at him. "When I die with debts? Mom, be realistic. You're 67, unemployed, living on Social Security. The math isn't hard." His voice was patient, like he was explaining basic addition to a child. "Patricia calculated your monthly expenses versus your income. You'll be broke within 2 years, 3 at most." Patricia. Of course she'd calculated my poverty down to the penny. "Sign here," he said, pointing to signature lines. "It's just smart planning. When you die broke, your debts stay yours. I won't be dragged down by a loser." That word hit me like a slap. Loser. My own son, calling me a loser. But I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just picked up the pen and signed every page where he indicated. David watched with obvious relief, probably thinking he'd dodged a financial bullet. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said, gathering the papers. This was the mature thing to do, the responsible thing. After he left, I sat in my chair and smiled. David had just legally severed all financial ties between us, which meant that what happened next was entirely my business. The Swiss lawyers were expecting my call. The conference call with the Swiss attorneys lasted 2 hours. I sat at my kitchen table, taking notes in a composition book like I was back in school, trying to comprehend the magnitude of what I'd inherited. The estate includes properties in Geneva, London, New York, and Monaco, Mr. Hoffman explained in his precise English, plus a substantial art collection, including 3 previously unknown Van Gogh paintings. The liquid assets alone exceed $400 million. $400 million in cash, just sitting in banks, earning interest. Mrs. Thompson, there are some immediate decisions to make. The Monaco apartment has been offered to a buyer for $32 million. Do you wish to sell? $32 million. For one apartment, in a place I'd never been. Not yet, I heard myself say. I'd like to see it first. After the call, I walked to my bathroom mirror and stared at the face looking back at me. Same gray hair, same wrinkles around blue eyes, same woman who'd been called a loser yesterday. Except now that woman was worth nearly $1 billion. The irony was delicious. I made myself lunch, a can of soup, because old habits die hard, and thought about David, about Patricia calculating my descent into poverty with such precision, about how quickly they'd wanted to protect themselves from my inevitable failure. They had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I drove to Millfield's only high-end lawyer's office. Jonathan Walsh had handled my husband's estate 8 years ago. He was a good man, honest, the kind who didn't oversell his services, perfect for what I needed. "Margaret," he said warmly when his secretary showed me in. "I heard about the library. I'm so sorry. How can I help?" I handed him the letter from Switzerland, watched his face change as he read, watched his eyes grow wide, then narrow as he read it again. "This appears to be legitimate," he said carefully. "Have you verified this with the Swiss firm?" "Yesterday. 2-hour conference call. It's real, Jonathan." He leaned back in his chair. $900 million. Give or take. "Margaret, do you realize what this means? You're one of the wealthiest people in the state, in the country." I nodded. "And I need your help with something important." For the next hour, I explained what I wanted. Jonathan listened without interruption, occasionally raising an eyebrow, but never questioning my decisions. Finally, he leaned forward. "I can set up the shell companies you want, the anonymous purchases, the trust funds, all of it. But Margaret, are you sure about this approach? There are more direct ways to handle family conflicts." "Jonathan, 3 days ago, my son made me sign papers to protect himself from my poverty. Yesterday I discovered I could buy his company and fire him without it affecting my grocery budget. Direct isn't what I'm after." He smiled then, the first real smile since I'd arrived. "What you're describing isn't just legal, it's creative. I like creative." We spent another hour going over details. By the time I left his office, the groundwork was laid. Jonathan would handle the American side of things while working with the Swiss firm on the international aspects. I drove home feeling oddly peaceful. For years since Robert died, I'd felt invisible. A widow taking up space, contributing nothing, slowly spending down savings that were never enough. David and Patricia had treated me like a burden waiting to happen. Well, the waiting was over. That evening, David called to check on me. "How are you holding up, Mom? Job searching yet?" "Actually, I'm fine," I said. "Better than fine." "That's the spirit." Patricia found some listings for senior apartments. Smaller places, more affordable. We thought maybe this weekend we could drive around and look at some. Senior apartments, places where old people went to quietly disappear. "That's thoughtful," I said, "but unnecessary. I won't be needing a smaller place." "Mom, we talked about this. You have to be realistic about your situation." "Oh, I am being very realistic about my situation, David. More realistic than you can imagine." There was a pause. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing important. Just that things have a way of working out." After I hung up, I called Switzerland. Mr. Hoffman answered immediately. "Mrs. Thompson, how may we assist you?" "I'd like to arrange a transfer," I said. $5 million to my American account. I have some purchases to make. $5 million to start with. Pocket change, really, when you had $900 million. But enough to begin what I had planned. Enough to remind my son exactly what kind of mistake he'd made. The $5 million appeared in my account on Tuesday morning. I stared at my online banking, watching the numbers that didn't seem real. Yesterday, I'd had $847. Today I had enough money to buy a small skyscraper. But first, I had research to do. I drove to the Millfield Coffee Company and set up my laptop at a corner table. If anyone asked, I was job hunting. Technically, that wasn't a lie. I was hunting for information about someone's job. David worked for Morrison Financial Services, a mid-sized insurance company that specialized in commercial policies. He'd been there 8 years, worked his way up to regional sales manager, made decent money. According to the company website, they handled policies for about 60% of the businesses in our county. More importantly, according to the public records I found, Morrison Financial was privately owned by the Morrison family. 3 brothers who'd inherited the company from their father, the kind of family business that might be interested in selling to the right buyer for the right price. I spent 3 hours researching Morrison Financial's revenue, client base, market position. By the time I finished my second coffee, I had a clear picture of a solid, profitable company worth approximately $12 million. Perfect. Next, I researched Patricia's interior design business. Sophisticated spaces operated out of a rented office downtown and catered to upper-middle-class clients. She had 3 employees and a decent reputation. But like most small businesses, she lived client to client. According to her business filings, she cleared about $80,000 a year in profit. Also perfect. Wednesday morning, I met with Jonathan Walsh again. He'd had time to process my request and had questions. The Morrison acquisition will take time, he explained. I've made discreet inquiries through intermediaries. The family is intrigued but cautious. They want to know who the buyer is. What did you tell them? That my client represents European investors interested in expanding their American portfolio. It's vague enough to be believable and exotic enough to be intriguing. I smiled. And Patricia's office building? Easier. The owner is eager to sell. Commercial real estate has been slow. Your offer of $2 million for a building worth $1.3 million got his attention immediately. Excellent. Make both offers. Margaret, Jonathan hesitated. I have to ask, what's the end game here? You'll own your son's company and your daughter-in-law's building. Then what? I thought about David's voice yesterday, checking on my job search like I was a charity case. About Patricia calculating my poverty. About the legal papers that severed me from their lives the moment I became inconvenient. Then I teach them about consequences, Jonathan. About what happens when you discard family because you think they're worthless. He nodded slowly. I see. And if they apologize? If they realize their mistake? They won't realize anything until it's too late. People like David and Patricia don't apologize until the damage is already done. Thursday afternoon, I got my first confirmation. The owner of Patricia's office building had accepted my offer. By next week, I would be Patricia's landlord. I celebrated by buying groceries without checking prices. Small rebellions, but satisfying ones. Friday brought a call from David. Mom, how's the apartment hunting going? I've decided not to move, I said. What? Mom, we talked about this. You can't afford to stay where you are. I can afford anything I want, David. Silence. Then, carefully, what does that mean? It means I'm fine. It means you don't need to worry about me becoming your financial burden. Are you seeing someone? His voice sharpened. Mom, please tell me you haven't fallen for some romance scam. Elderly people are targeted all the time. Elderly people, like I was a doddering fool waiting to be taken advantage of. No romance scam, David. I'm just not the charity case you think I am. Then where is this confidence coming from? 3 days ago, you were unemployed and scared. I smiled, looking out my apartment window at the town where I'd lived for 40 years. The town where everyone knew Margaret Thompson as the quiet widow who worked at the library. Soon, they'd know her as something else entirely. I received some unexpected good news, I said. My situation has improved dramatically. What kind of good news? The kind that changes everything. After I hung up, I called Jonathan. Any word from Morrison Financial? They want to meet next week. They're very interested, but they want assurances about financing and the buyer's intentions. Tell them the buyer intends to honor all existing contracts and maintain current operations. No layoffs, no restructuring. That should reassure them. Margaret, they're asking for $14 million now. Apparently word got out about the European interest and they're testing the market. $14 million instead of 12. I almost laughed. Accept their price, I said. But I want the sale completed within 30 days. That's very fast for this type of transaction. Jonathan, I have $900 million earning interest in Swiss banks. $14 million is what I spend on coffee. The next week would bring interesting conversations. Patricia would discover her rent was increasing dramatically. David would learn his company had new owners. But they still wouldn't know the most important thing of all. They wouldn't know that the woman they dismissed as a loser was about to become their boss. Monday morning, Patricia called me in tears. "Margaret, something terrible happened. My landlord sold the building to some foreign investment company, and they're tripling my rent, $3,000 a month. I can't afford that." I made appropriate sympathetic noises while stirring my coffee. Through Jonathan's shell company, I was now Patricia's landlord. The rent increase was perfectly legal. Her lease was month to month, and I'd given proper notice. "That's awful, dear. Have you talked to them?" "I tried calling, but they won't negotiate. The property management company says the new owners want to maximize the investment potential of the building." Her voice cracked. "I don't know what to do. I'll have to move, but there's nothing available in my price range downtown. Everything else would mean losing most of my clients. I'm so sorry this is happening. David thinks I should ask you for help with the deposit on a new place. But I told him absolutely not. You have enough to worry about with your own situation." How thoughtful. They wouldn't ask me for money because they thought I didn't have any. "Have you considered expanding your business?" I asked innocently. "Maybe this is an opportunity to think bigger." "With what money?" "Margaret, I'm barely keeping the lights on as it is. This rent increase will kill me." After Patricia hung up, I called Jonathan. "How's the Morrison acquisition proceeding?" "Faster than expected. The family is motivated. Apparently one of the brothers wants to retire, and buying out his share was straining the other two. Your offer solves multiple problems for them." "Excellent. And my other request?" "The background checks on David's client list are complete. Very interesting reading." Jonathan had investigated David's sales record and client relationships, not to harm him, but to understand exactly how good he was at his job. The answer was moderately successful, but not irreplaceable. David had charm and persistence, but several of his major accounts had expressed frustration with his service. Most importantly, his biggest client, Hartwell Manufacturing, had been considering switching insurance companies for months. "What did you find about Hartwell?" "They've been unhappy with response times and claim processing. David's been managing the relationship, but barely. One more service failure, and they'll likely leave." "Perfect. I want you to arrange a lunch with Mr. Hartwell. Tell him you represent a European insurance company interested in acquiring clients in the American market." "Margaret, you can't steal your son's clients." "I'm not stealing anything. I'm offering better service. Business is business, right? Isn't that what David would say?" Tuesday afternoon, David called with his own crisis. "Mom, something weird is happening at work. The owners are selling the company to some European conglomerate. It came out of nowhere." "That sounds exciting," I said. "New opportunities?" "I don't know. Nobody knows anything except that the sale is happening fast. Mr. Morrison says the new owners want to keep everything the same, but you know how these things go. New ownership usually means changes. I'm sure you'll be fine. You're good at what you do." "Yeah, but good enough for European standards? These people might have completely different expectations." I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Wednesday brought a delightful development. Mr. Hartwell agreed to meet with Jonathan about switching his company's insurance needs. The meeting was set for Friday at the country club. Thursday evening, Patricia called again, more desperate now. "Margaret, I have until Friday to decide whether to sign the new lease or move out. The property management company won't budge on the rent. David thinks I should take out a loan to cover the difference. But the bank won't approve me for enough. What will you do?" "I don't know. Maybe I'll have to close the business. Start over somewhere cheaper, outside town." The defeat in her voice was complete. Patricia, who'd calculated my financial ruin with such precision, was now facing her own. "I'm sorry this is so difficult. The worst part is the timing. I finally had some momentum, some good clients. Mrs. Richardson just hired me to redecorate her entire house, a $50,000 project. But if I have to move, I'll lose her and everyone else." After she hung up, I sat in my chair thinking about Patricia. She wasn't evil, just thoughtless. She'd never considered that her calculations about my poverty might hurt. In her mind, she was being practical, realistic, smart. Now she was learning what it felt like to have someone else control your financial future. Friday afternoon, Jonathan called with news. "Morrison Financial is officially sold. Paperwork completed. Money transferred. You now own David's company. And Hartwell Manufacturing? Mr. Hartwell was very impressed with our proposal. He's ready to switch insurance companies immediately. He asked when we could take over his policy. Tell him Monday. And Jonathan? I want David to be the one who has to call Hartwell and tell him about the account transition. Margaret, that's business. David will be following company protocol, informing clients about service changes. Nothing inappropriate about that. I hung up and made myself dinner, humming softly. Tomorrow was Saturday. David and Patricia would spend the weekend worrying about their futures, not knowing that their fates were entirely in my hands. On Monday, David would arrive at work to discover his new boss. Patricia would have to decide whether to pay rent she couldn't afford or lose the business she'd built. And I would still be just their poor, unemployed mother, the loser they'd legally severed from their lives, for now. Monday morning, I dressed carefully in my best navy blue dress and drove to Morrison Financial Services. Time to meet my employees. David's car was already in the parking lot when I arrived at 9 a.m. Through Jonathan's arrangements, I was scheduled to meet with the management team at 9:30 to introduce myself as the representative of the new ownership group. I sat in my car for a few minutes, watching David through the office windows. He was at his desk, probably reviewing client files, preparing for what he thought would be a normal day. In 30 minutes, his world would tilt sideways. Jonathan met me at the front door. Ready for this? I've been ready since he called me a loser. The conference room held 6 people. The 3 Morrison brothers who were staying on temporarily to ease the transition. David, another sales manager named Robert, and Sarah from accounting. They all stood when Jonathan and I entered. Ladies and gentlemen, Jonathan said, I'd like you to meet Mrs. Margaret Thompson, representing the new ownership. David's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, disbelief, then something approaching panic. Mom? His voice came out as a squeak. Hello, David. Surprised to see me? The Morrison brothers looked between us uncertainly. You two know each other? Asked the eldest, Frank Morrison. Mrs. Thompson is my mother, David said weakly. What a wonderful coincidence, I said smoothly. I had no idea David worked here when my associates recommended Morrison Financial as an acquisition target. That was technically true. I'd known David worked there, but my associates had indeed recommended it, after I'd told them to. Mom, I don't understand. How are you representing investors? You just lost your job at the library. I smiled at him with the same patience he'd shown me when explaining why I'd die broke. David, my circumstances have changed recently. Quite dramatically, actually. Frank Morrison cleared his throat. Should we postpone this meeting, given the family connection? Not at all, I said. Business is business. Isn't that right, David? For the next hour, I reviewed operations with the management team. Morrison Financial was exactly what I'd expected. Solid, profitable, but lacking vision for growth. Perfect for my purposes. I want to assure everyone that there will be no immediate changes, I announced. Salaries remain the same, benefits unchanged, and all current client relationships will be honored. What about long-term plans? Asked Robert. We'll be investing in technology upgrades and expanded services. The goal is growth, not cost-cutting. David hadn't spoken since his initial shock. He sat staring at me like I was a mirage that might disappear if he blinked. After the meeting, I asked to speak with David privately. The others filed out, leaving us alone in the conference room. Mom, what the hell is going on? Language, David. Don't. Just don't. How did you buy this company? Where did you get the money? I inherited it. Inherited what? From who? From my great-aunt Beatrice. You remember her from Uncle Harold's funeral? The weird old lady with the paintings? Mom, she lived in a tiny apartment. I almost laughed. Aunt Beatrice's tiny apartment in Geneva was worth $40 million, but David's memory was selective. Appearances can be deceiving, I said. Aunt Beatrice was quite wealthy. How wealthy? Wealthy enough to buy this company without affecting my grocery budget. David's face had gone pale. Mom, please tell me this isn't some kind of revenge thing because of the papers I asked you to sign. Revenge? I considered the word. No, not revenge. Education. What kind of education? The kind that teaches you not to call your mother a loser. David flinched. I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it? I was being practical. Realistic about your situation. My situation has changed, David, dramatically. And now I'm being practical about yours. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, are you going to fire me? That depends entirely on your performance. This is a business, and I expect professional results from all my employees. Your employees. Yes. I'm your boss now, David. I hope that won't be a problem. I stood to leave, then turned back. Oh, and David, I need you to call Hartwell Manufacturing this afternoon. They're switching to a different insurance provider. You'll need to arrange the policy transition. David's largest client? Gone. I watched understanding dawn in his eyes. Mom, Mrs. Thompson, please. Let's keep things professional. I left him sitting in the conference room, probably wondering how the woman he'd dismissed as a poverty-bound loser had just become his boss. But David's education was just beginning. That afternoon, I drove to Patricia's office building. My building. She was working late, probably trying to figure out how to salvage her business before the rent increase took effect. I found her in her office, surrounded by fabric samples and floor plans, crying softly over her laptop. Patricia, are you all right? She looked up, startled. Margaret, I didn't hear you come in. The front door was open. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by. I'm just trying to finish this proposal for Mrs. Richardson. If I can get her deposit, maybe I can afford the new rent for another month while I look for a different space. Any luck finding somewhere else? Nothing. Everything decent is either too expensive or too far from my client base. She wiped her eyes. I'm starting to think I should just close the business and start over somewhere else. Maybe move back to Ohio, near my sister. Ohio, 3 states away. David would love that. His wife gone, his mother-in-law problem solved. That seems drastic. What choice do I have? These new owners are impossible. They won't negotiate, won't consider a payment plan, nothing. It's like they want me gone. I sat down across from her desk. Patricia, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you remember the conversation we had last month? About my financial future? She looked confused. What conversation? When you calculated how long my savings would last. When you figured out I'd be broke in 2 or 3 years. Her face flushed red. Margaret, I was just trying to help David plan. Plan for what? Plan for when. When you might need help. When I'd be a burden. That's not what I meant, isn't it? You calculated my poverty down to the penny, Patricia. You convinced David I'd drag him down financially. You made him get those papers to protect himself from my inevitable failure. Patricia was crying again. I was trying to be practical. So am I. I stood up and walked to her window, looking down at the street below. My street, in my building. Sometimes being practical means accepting difficult truths, I said without turning around. Sometimes it means making hard choices about who deserves your help and who doesn't. Margaret, I don't understand what you're trying to say. I turned back to face her. I'm saying that consequences have a way of catching up with us. Patricia, the things we do, the judgments we make, the way we treat people, it all comes back eventually. Are you angry about the papers? Because David explained that. I'm not angry, I said truthfully. I'm educated. I walked to the door, then paused. Good luck with Mrs. Richardson's proposal. I hope the deposit works out for you. After I left, I sat in my car outside the building, watching Patricia through the window. She was staring at her computer screen, probably trying to make sense of our conversation. Tomorrow she'd have to decide, pay the impossible rent or lose everything she'd built. And still, neither she nor David had any idea who was really controlling their fates. Tuesday afternoon, David appeared at my apartment door. I'd been expecting this visit since Monday's revelation at Morrison Financial. We need to talk, he said, pushing past me into my living room. The same aggressive move he'd made when he brought the financial separation papers. But now, his confidence was shaky. Of course. Would you like coffee? Mom, cut the act. I know what you're doing. What am I doing, David? You bought my company to get back at me. And somehow you're connected to Patricia's rent situation, too. I poured myself coffee, not offering him any. That's quite an accusation. Is it true? Which part? All of it. I sat down in my chair, the same one where I'd signed his papers. Yes, it's true. David stared at me. Whatever he'd expected. Simple honesty, wasn't it? Why? Because you called me a loser. Because you and Patricia calculated my descent into poverty like it was entertainment. Because you made me sign papers to protect yourself from my inevitable failure. I was trying to be responsible. You were trying to discard me before I became inconvenient. David began pacing, his insurance salesman composure completely gone. Okay, I handled it badly. I'm sorry, but this is insane. Mom, you can't just buy people's lives because your feelings got hurt. Can't I? I seem to be doing exactly that. Where did this money come from? Aunt Beatrice died broke in that tiny apartment. Aunt Beatrice owned that tiny apartment in the most expensive district of Geneva. She also owned a villa in Monaco, a house in London, and art worth more than most people make in their lifetimes. How much money are we talking about? I sipped my coffee, watching him squirm. Enough. Mom, please, I need to know what I'm dealing with here. What you're dealing with is the consequence of your choices, David. He stopped pacing. What do you want from me? I want you to understand something. For 8 years since your father died, you've treated me like a burden waiting to happen. You've been polite but distant, helpful but calculating. You and Patricia have measured my worth in dollars and cents. That's not fair, isn't it? When was the last time you called me just to talk? When did you ever visit without needing something? When did you treat me like family instead of an obligation? David was quiet for a long moment. Then, I don't know how to fix this. I don't think you can. What does that mean? It means I've learned something important about you. David, when you thought I was poor and helpless, you discarded me. Now that you know I have money, you're here trying to fix things. But it's not me you want to fix. It's your situation. That's not true, isn't it? Are you here because you love me? Or because you're scared I'll fire you? He couldn't answer, which was answer enough. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. You'll keep your job as long as you perform well. I'm a fair employer, but our personal relationship, that ended when you made me sign those papers. Mom, Mrs. Thompson at work, please. David's phone rang. He glanced at it, his face growing pale. It's Patricia. Answer it. He put the call on speaker. Patricia's voice filled my living room, high and panicked. David, I figured it out. Margaret's behind the building sale. She's the one raising my rent. David looked at me. I nodded confirmation. How did you find out? He asked. I hired a private investigator to trace the ownership. The shell company leads back to a Swiss firm that represents Margaret Thompson. She's our mystery landlord. She's here now, David said quietly. Margaret? Margaret, are you listening? I'm here, Patricia. Why are you doing this to us? I'm not doing anything to you. Patricia, I'm making business decisions based on market values and investment potential. That's bullshit, and you know it. Language, dear. You're destroying my business because of those stupid papers David made you sign. The papers that legally severed our financial relationship? The ones that protected you from my inevitable poverty? Silence from Patricia's end. I'm simply applying the same practical thinking you used when you calculated my financial ruin, I continued. Business is business, right? This is different. How? Because we're family. I laughed, a sound without humor. Family. That's interesting. When I was unemployed and scared, family meant protection from liability. Now that you need help, family means something else entirely. Margaret, please. I'll lose everything. Yes, you probably will. I'll apologize. We'll both apologize. Whatever you want us to say. I don't want apologies, Patricia. I want you to understand what it feels like to have someone else control your future. To know that someone you trusted thinks you're worthless. David cleared his throat. Mom, how much money did Aunt Beatrice leave you? I finished my coffee and set down the cup. $900 million. The silence was absolute. David sat down hard on my sofa. Patricia's line went quiet, except for the sound of her breathing. 900 million! David's voice was barely a whisper. Give or take. And I called you a loser. Yes, you did. Mom, I had no idea. Of course you didn't. If you had, you would have treated me very differently. But that's exactly the point, isn't it? Your respect was conditional on my bank account. David buried his face in his hands. Patricia was crying audibly through the phone. What happens now? Patricia asked. I stood up, smoothing my dress. Now you both learn what it's like to live with uncertainty, to have someone else hold your future in their hands, to be judged and found wanting. For how long? That depends on how long it takes you to understand what you've done. After they left, David walking like a man heading to his execution. Patricia sobbing through the phone about lost clients and ruined dreams. I sat in my chair and thought about the last 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago, I'd been Margaret Thompson, unemployed library worker, heading toward poverty and dependence. Today, I was Margaret Thompson, multi-millionaire, employer, landlord. The same person, but treated entirely differently based on one thing: money. David and Patricia were learning that lesson now. Learning that their calculations about my worth had been more than miscalculations. They'd been revelations about who they really were, and we were only halfway through their education. Patricia's business died slowly, then all at once. Within 2 weeks of the rent increase, she lost 3 major clients who couldn't follow her to a cheaper location outside town. Mrs. Richardson's $50,000 project vanished when Patricia had to admit she might not have an office to work from. I watched it all unfold from my new office at Morrison Financial, where I'd taken a small suite next to David's workspace. Not to micromanage, I assured the staff, but to understand the business I'd purchased. Really, I just enjoyed watching David squirm every time he saw me. "Mom," he said one Thursday morning, appearing in my doorway with dark circles under his eyes. "We need to discuss Patricia's situation." "What about it?" "She's closing the business. She can't afford the rent, and moving killed her client base." "That's unfortunate. You could help her." "How?" "Lower the rent. Give her time to rebuild." "Something." I leaned back in my chair, the same way he'd leaned back when explaining my inevitable poverty. "David, why would I do that?" "Because she's family." "Family." I savored the word. Like when she calculated my descent into poverty for your entertainment? She was trying to help plan for your future. My future as your burden. David ran his hands through his hair. "What do you want from us? Blood? I want you to understand consequences. Patricia spent years treating me like an inconvenience. Now she's learning what it feels like to be discarded. She's my wife, and I'm your mother, but that didn't stop you from calling me a loser." David left without another word. Through my window, I watched him walk to his car, shoulders slumped in defeat. That afternoon, Jonathan called with news. The Monaco apartment sold for $32 million, as expected. Also, there's been an interesting development with Hartwell Manufacturing. "Oh?" "They're so pleased with their new insurance provider that they're recommending us to their business partners. 3 more companies want to switch from Morrison Financial." I smiled. "How delightful. And David's commission on the lost accounts?" "Approximately $40,000 this quarter. That's a significant hit to his annual income." David made decent money at Morrison Financial, but losing his biggest clients would cut his salary by nearly 30%. Just enough to make life uncomfortable without being devastating. Perfect. What about Patricia's business closure? She filed bankruptcy paperwork yesterday. The business assets will be liquidated to pay creditors. Patricia, who'd built sophisticated spaces over 8 years, was losing everything. Her reputation, her client list, her independence. And my other project? The research is complete. David and Patricia's mortgage company is very interested in your acquisition offer. I'd been busy beyond just buying David's workplace and Patricia's building. Their mortgage holder, Millfield Community Bank, was a small institution that I could easily purchase. Not to foreclose on their house, but to control their financial future completely. "Excellent. Make the offer." That evening, David and Patricia came to my apartment together. Both looked like they'd aged years in the past month. "Mom," David said carefully, "we want to make this right." "How?" Patricia spoke up, her voice shaky. "We know we hurt you. We were thoughtless and cruel, and we're sorry." "Are you sorry for what you did, or sorry you got caught?" "Both," David said honestly, "but mostly for what we did." "I see. And if I'd never inherited money?" "If I'd actually become the burden you predicted?" They exchanged glances. "We would have helped you," Patricia said unconvincingly. "Would you? Even after making me sign papers to protect yourselves from my debts?" Silence. "Here's what I think," I continued. "You're sorry because your calculations were wrong. You're sorry because the worthless old woman turned out to be worth $900 million. But you're not sorry for treating me like garbage when you thought I was powerless." "That's not fair," David protested. "Fair? Was it fair when you made me sign legal documents because you thought I'd die broke and drag you down?" Patricia started crying. "I've lost everything, Margaret. My business, my reputation, 8 years of work. Yes, you have. Doesn't that satisfy you? I thought about it seriously. Not yet. They left looking broken, which should have felt satisfying. Instead, I felt oddly empty. Revenge wasn't as sweet as I'd expected. But I wasn't finished yet. Friday morning brought the news I'd been waiting for. Jonathan called with confirmation. Millfield Community Bank accepted your offer. You now own David and Patricia's mortgage. Excellent. Current balance? $240,000. They've been making payments on time, but they're already stretched thin with Patricia's business closure. Through my office window, I could see David at his desk, probably working on damage control after losing another client to our mysterious European competitors. He had no idea his mother now held the deed to his house. What are the terms of their current mortgage? Standard 30-year fixed rate. Monthly payment of $1,800, but there's something interesting in the fine print. What? A clause allowing the lender to call in the full loan amount if the borrower's financial situation changes significantly. Patricia's bankruptcy filing could trigger that clause. I smiled. Could it now? Margaret, are you really going to foreclose on your son's house? I'm going to give them choices, Jonathan. The same kind of choices they gave me. That afternoon, I implemented Phase 2 of my education program. I had Jonathan send official letters to both David and Patricia, informing them of the mortgage transfer and requesting updated financial statements. David appeared in my office an hour after receiving his letter. You bought our mortgage? I bought the bank that holds your mortgage. There's a difference. Is there? Of course. I'm a responsible lender. I want to ensure my investment is secure. David stared at me like I'd grown a second head. Mom, you own my house. The bank owns your house until you pay off the loan. I own the bank. Same thing. Not quite. As long as you make your payments, nothing changes. And if we can't make the payments, then we'll discuss options. David's face went pale. Patricia's unemployment benefits run out next month. Without her income, you'll have to make adjustments. What kind of adjustments? I pulled out a file folder. Well, there are several options. You could refinance with another lender, though your credit has taken a hit with Patricia's bankruptcy. You could sell the house and buy something smaller. Or what? You could ask family for help. The irony hung in the air between us. David, who'd protected himself from my financial problems, now needed to ask me for help with his. Would you help us? That depends. On what? On whether you've learned anything from this experience. David was quiet for a long moment. I've learned that you're vindictive. Have you learned why? Because we hurt your feelings. I stood up, walking to the window. David, do you remember what you said when you brought me those papers to sign? I said a lot of things. You said I'd die broke and drag you down. You called me a loser. I was wrong. You were honest. You showed me exactly what you thought of me when you believed I was powerless. I'm sorry. Are you? Or are you just scared? He couldn't answer. That evening, Patricia called me, sobbing. Margaret, please, I know you hate us, but we're going to lose our house. Why would I hate you, Patricia? Because of what we did. Because of the papers, the calculations, all of it. I don't hate you. I pity you. Pity us? You had a mother-in-law who would have done anything for you, who helped with the grandchildren, never interfered, always supported your decisions, and you threw it all away because you thought I was financially inconvenient. We were scared. Scared of what? Scared of being responsible for you if something happened. So you decided to be responsible for nothing instead. Patricia was quiet. Then, what do you want from us? I want you to understand what it feels like to have your future controlled by someone who thinks you're worthless. We never thought you were worthless. Didn't you? You calculated my poverty like a math problem. You convinced David to protect himself from my inevitable failure. You treated me like a liability waiting to happen. I was trying to be practical. So am I. After I hung up, I sat in my chair thinking about the past 6 weeks. David and Patricia were learning hard lessons about consequences, about how it felt to be powerless, about what happened when someone else controlled their destiny. But tomorrow would bring an even bigger revelation. Tomorrow they'd discover just how far their education was about to extend. Saturday morning, I drove to David and Patricia's house for the first time since this all began. They'd invited me for what they called a family discussion, but I knew desperation when I heard it. Patricia answered the door looking exhausted. Margaret, thank you for coming. Their beautiful colonial home, the one with the mortgage I now owned, showed signs of financial stress. The landscaping I'd unknowingly funded last year was perfect, but the windows needed cleaning and the paint was starting to chip. Coffee? Patricia offered. Thank you. David was waiting in their living room, dressed casually, but looking like he was preparing for a job interview. Which, in a way, he was. Mom, we've been talking, he began once we were all seated. About everything that's happened, about what we did to you. And we want to make it right. I sipped my coffee, waiting. Patricia leaned forward. We know we can't undo what we did, but we want to try to rebuild our relationship. How? However you want, David said. Whatever it takes. Interesting. And if I'd never inherited money? If your calculations had been correct and I'd become the burden you predicted? They exchanged glances. We would have helped you, Patricia said. Even after the legal separation papers? We would have found a way. Would you? Because those papers specifically prevented you from being liable for my debts. Even if you'd wanted to help, you couldn't have. David shifted uncomfortably. We didn't think it through. Or you thought it through perfectly. You protected yourselves from my poverty while keeping the option to benefit from any unexpected wealth. That's not how we saw it. How did you see it? We saw an elderly woman who was going to struggle financially, and we wanted to protect our children's inheritance. The honesty was startling. Even now, they were thinking about money. Your children's inheritance from whom? From us, Patricia said quickly. From our hard work. Not from me. We never expected anything from you. Because you thought I had nothing to give. Another uncomfortable silence. Let me share something with you, I said, setting down my coffee cup. Yesterday I purchased 3 more businesses in town. The hardware store where David shops for his weekend projects, the daycare where you send the children, and Patricia's favorite restaurant downtown. Their faces went white. Why? David whispered. Because I can. Because I have $900 million and the power to reshape this entire town if I choose to. Mom, this is insane. Is it? Or is it educational? I stood up, walking to their mantel where family photos smiled down at us. Pictures of holidays, vacations, happy moments when they'd included me out of obligation rather than love. David, you're going to resign from Morrison Financial. What? You heard me. Monday morning, you'll submit your resignation. I can't do that. It's my job. Our income. Our income? I thought you'd legally separated our finances. Patricia started crying again. Margaret, please, we get it. We understand what we did wrong. Do you? Then explain it to me. We treated you badly when we thought you were poor. And we only care now because you're rich. Finally, a moment of actual honesty. That's right, Patricia. If I'd died broke like you predicted, you would have felt justified in protecting yourselves from me. But I didn't die broke, so now you're scrambling to get back in my good graces. What do you want us to do? David asked desperately. I want you to experience powerlessness. I want you to know what it feels like when someone else controls every aspect of your life. For how long? Until you understand. Understand what? That respect shouldn't depend on bank account balances. That family means loyalty even when it's inconvenient. That love isn't conditional on someone's financial usefulness. I walked to the door, then turned back. David, your resignation letter is due Monday. Patricia, I'm buying your sister's house in Ohio, the one you mentioned wanting to move near. Consider it a going-away gift. You're forcing us to leave? I'm giving you the same choice you gave me. Accept the consequences of your actions or face even worse ones. As I drove home, I felt the familiar emptiness that followed each victory. This wasn't bringing me joy anymore, but there was one more lesson to teach. One more revelation that would complete their education. Monday morning arrived with unexpected news. David didn't resign from Morrison Financial. Instead, he was waiting in my office when I arrived, resignation letter in hand, but not submitting it. I'm not quitting, he announced. Excuse me? I said I'm not quitting. Fire me if you want, but I'm not resigning. This was new. David had found some backbone. Interesting. Why the sudden defiance? Because I realized something over the weekend. You're not trying to teach us a lesson anymore. You're trying to destroy us completely. Am I? The hardware store, the daycare, Patricia's restaurant, buying her sister's house. You're not just punishing us, you're controlling every aspect of our lives. I sat down at my desk, studying my son. And I think you've made your point. We were wrong. We hurt you. We're sorry. But this has gone beyond education into something else. What would you call it? Revenge. Is that what you think this is? I think you're drunk on power. I think having $900 million has changed you into someone I don't recognize. David sat down across from my desk. Mom, I remember you. You were kind, patient, forgiving. You helped everyone who needed it. This person you've become, this isn't you, isn't it? Or is this who I always was underneath the convenient, accommodating mother you preferred? What do you mean? I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a folder. David, there's something you don't know. Something I've been saving for the right moment. What? The inheritance from Aunt Beatrice. It didn't just include money and property. David looked confused. What else? Information, records, documentation of her extensive research into our family. I opened the folder and spread several documents across my desk. Aunt Beatrice was very thorough. She investigated every family member before deciding who deserved her fortune. She knew about your father's business practices, your mortgage struggles, Patricia's spending habits. She knew about every family gathering where I was treated like an obligation. David's face was growing pale. She also knew about the conversation you and Patricia had last Christmas, the one where you discussed having me declared incompetent so you could control my assets. December 23rd, in your kitchen while I was playing with the grandchildren in the living room. Patricia suggested that my confused behavior about money meant I needed supervision. You agreed that it might be necessary someday. David's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Aunt Beatrice had private investigators. David, she recorded conversations, she documented everything, and she left very specific instructions about how her fortune should be used. I pulled out the final document, the one that had taken me weeks to fully understand. The $900 million isn't just a gift, it's a weapon. Aunt Beatrice wanted to prove that greed reveals character. She left me enough money to expose the true nature of everyone in our family. That's insane. Is it? Look what's happened. The moment you thought I was poor and helpless, you discarded me. The moment you discovered I was wealthy, you came crawling back. You've proven exactly what Aunt Beatrice suspected about your character. David stared at the documents. So this was all planned? The whole thing? Not planned, facilitated. Aunt Beatrice gave me the tools to reveal who you really are. What you chose to do with those revelations was entirely up to you. And Patricia? Patricia chose to calculate my poverty for entertainment. She chose to treat me like a liability. She chose to support your decision to legally separate from me. David was quiet for a long moment. Then, what happens now? Now you face the consequences of failing Aunt Beatrice's test. What test? The test of character. The test of whether you'd love me for who I am or what I have. The test of whether family loyalty matters when it's inconvenient. I gathered the documents and put them back in the folder. You failed, David, spectacularly. So what's my punishment? Your punishment is living with the knowledge of who you really are, and with the consequences of the choices you've made. David left my office looking like a man who just discovered the ground beneath his feet was quicksand. But there was one more revelation coming. One that would complete the lesson Aunt Beatrice had designed. 3 days later, I called David and Patricia to my apartment for what I told them would be our final conversation. They arrived looking like prisoners heading to sentencing. Sit, I said, gesturing to my sofa. They sat. I have an announcement to make. About Aunt Beatrice's inheritance. David looked up hopefully. Are you giving it back? Donating it? No, David. I'm keeping every penny. But there's something you need to understand about what that money represents. I walked to my kitchen table where I'd laid out all of Aunt Beatrice's documents, including some they hadn't seen yet. Aunt Beatrice's final letter to me contained specific instructions. She wanted me to use her fortune to conduct what she called character experiments on our family members. Patricia spoke up weakly. What kind of experiments? The kind that reveal who people really are when they think no one important is watching. I picked up the thickest folder. This contains detailed records of every family interaction for the past 10 years. Every slight, every dismissal, every time I was treated as less than. Aunt Beatrice documented it all. How? private investigators, recording devices. She was very thorough. David's face had gone ashen. She was spying on us? She was collecting evidence. Evidence of how her family treated the most vulnerable member when they thought there were no consequences. I opened the folder and pulled out a transcript. This is from your conversation with Patricia after my husband's funeral. Quote, "Now we'll have to deal with Mom's neediness. She'll probably want to move in with us, or something pathetic like that." Patricia made a small choking sound. "This is from last Thanksgiving. Mom's getting more confused about money. Maybe we should start thinking about guardianship options. We were just talking about controlling my life for your convenience." Yes, I know. I set down the transcript and picked up another document. But here's the part you'll find most interesting. Aunt Beatrice's will contained a provision that you never learned about. What provision? If any family member passed her character test, if they showed genuine love and respect when they thought I was powerless, they would receive a substantial inheritance of their own. David and Patricia looked at each other hopefully. $50 million each, to be exact. Their expressions brightened considerably. However, I continued, if they failed the test by treating me badly when they thought I had nothing, they would receive something else instead. What? I smiled, feeling genuinely happy for the first time in months. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Forever. The hope died in their eyes like a candle being snuffed out. You see, Aunt Beatrice believed that character is revealed by how we treat people when we think it doesn't matter, when we think no one important is watching, when we think there are no consequences. I walked to my window, looking out at the town where I'd lived my entire adult life. You treated me terribly when you thought I was poor and helpless. You made me sign papers to protect yourselves from my poverty. You calculated my descent into destitution like it was a math problem. You called me a loser. Mom, you failed the test. David, both of you, completely and utterly. Can we try again? Can we fix this? I turned back to face them. The test is over. The results are final. So, what happens now? Now, I live my life as a very wealthy woman who finally understands her true worth. And you live your lives knowing exactly what you threw away. Will you help us keep our house? No. Will you let David keep his job? No. Will you ever forgive us? I considered the question seriously. Forgiveness isn't the issue. Understanding is. You've shown me who you really are when you think it's safe to be cruel. I can't unknow that. David stood up, his face a mixture of desperation and anger. So that's it? You destroy our lives and walk away? I didn't destroy your lives, David. I revealed the consequences of your choices. There's a difference. What about the grandchildren? They're innocent in all this. Yes, they are. And they'll be provided for. Trust funds, college expenses, everything they need. Aunt Beatrice made provisions for innocent parties. Just not for us. Just not for you. Patricia was crying silently, mascara running down her cheeks. I never meant for any of this to happen, she whispered. Yes, you did. You meant for me to disappear quietly into poverty while you protected yourselves from any inconvenience. You just didn't expect consequences. They left without another word. I watched from my window as they walked to their car, heads down, shoulders slumped. Tomorrow they'd face foreclosure proceedings. Next week David would clean out his desk. Next month they'd move to Ohio, where Patricia's sister had agreed to let them stay while they started over. With nothing. I made myself tea and sat in my chair, the same chair where I'd signed their papers 2 months ago. The woman who'd signed those papers had been broken, dismissed, discarded. The woman sitting here now owned 3 businesses, a bank, and enough money to buy happiness for anyone who deserved it. But more importantly, she'd learned that respect and love couldn't be purchased. They had to be earned through character and proven through choices. David and Patricia had made their choices. Now they'd live with the consequences forever. I opened my laptop and began researching charities. $900 million could do a lot of good in the world when given to people who actually deserved it. People who understood that worth wasn't measured in bank accounts, but in how we treat others when we think no one is watching. The lesson was complete. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.